This sequestered glen has long been known by the name of Sleepy Hollow, and its rustic lads were called Sleepy Hollow boys throughout all the neighboring country. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. The legend of Sleepy Hollow was written in 1820, right in our time period, and I love this whole story. It's such a quintessential American tale, and we all know of it, and maybe have read it ourselves. What's really great about this tale of Sleepy Hollow is the food that it includes. You can almost smell it right through the pages. Let me read to you about the Van Tassel Feast and what was included. Such heaped up platters of cakes of various and almost indescribable kinds, known only to the experienced Dutch housewives. There was the doughty donut, and the tenderer oliekoek, and the crisp and crumbling cruller, sweet cakes and shortcakes, ginger cakes and honey cakes, and the whole family of cakes. And then there were the apple pies and peach pies, pumpkin pies, besides slices of ham and smoked beef, and moreover delectable dishes of preserved plums and peaches and pears and quinces, not to mention broiled shad and roasted chicken, together with bowls of milk and cream, all mingled higgledy-piggledy, pretty much as I have enumerated them, with the motherly teapot sending up its clouds of vapor from the midst. There you have a table full of food. And if we want to make some of these things, actually, let's think about it. We have done roasted chicken. We've done broiled shad. We've done pies, peach pies and apple pies and pumpkin pies. We just did the apple pie recipe. We have done donuts and oliekoek or something very, very similar to that. And today we're going to dig into what was this ginger cake, so we can have something right out of the feast that we can taste and try. So we want to have ginger cakes exactly like Ichabod Crane's last meal, just like the ones at this Van Tassel Feast. So what exactly would they be like? He doesn't give a recipe, but we fortunately have this cookbook, which is really going to tell us exactly what we need. Now, this story was published in 1820. He was talking about a generation before that, so probably about 1800 plus or minus is where the story is set. Well, American Cookery by Amelia Simmons was published in 1796, so about 5 years before that. And amazingly enough, this first American cookbook, this one that was first written by an American, she's from almost exactly that area. So that this recipe or this cookbook is going to give us recipes very similar to what this feast was like. So it turns out Amelia Simmons has a whole section of, in fact, a whole page of gingerbread, ginger cake recipes. These are really important. This recipe that we're going to be using here has a very special ingredient. In fact, it seems like it's almost the first time this ingredient shows up in an English cookbook, because she's actually writing about Dutch cookery here, and this ingredient does not show up in English cookery. In fact, if you go digging for ginger cake recipes in English cookbooks, they're not like this one. Recipe number 1, 3 pounds of flour, a grated nutmeg, a whole grated nutmeg, 2 ounces of ginger, 1 pound of sugar, 3 small spoons of pearl ash dissolved in cream, 1 pound of flour, 4 eggs, knead it stiff, shape it to your fancy, bake it 15 minutes. So, this special ingredient, it's pearl ash. You've probably never heard of pearl ash in your entire life, and you'd be reading through this cookbook and you say, pearl ash? What is this? Pearl ash is a primitive form of baking soda. So it's not sodium bicarbonate, it is potassium carbonate. So it's a primitive form. It doesn't fluff as much as sodium bicarbonate, and it's got potassium left over instead of sodium. We're used to the flavor of sodium. we generally don't like the flavor of potassium, so today we're going to be substituting sodium bicarbonate. That's something you can get very easily. It's probably in your house already. We're making a 1/3 sized one here, so I shrank all the ingredients. 1 pound of flour. Now let's put in 6 ounces of sugar. Here is the ginger. Now 1/3 of 2 ounces is a little less than 1 ounce. We're gonna go with more than that. I like a lot of ginger here, so I'm gonna put in extra ginger, more than 1 ounce of ginger. And finally, our nutmeg. She calls for a whole nutmeg, so obviously we don't need a whole nutmeg, but maybe 1/3 of a nutmeg. You can use a teaspoonful if you're using pre-ground nutmeg. Shame on you. Let's mix all our dry ingredients up. Make sure you use a bowl that's big enough. This one's just barely big enough. Next in goes the butter, but we need to have this pearl ash, or in this case, baking soda, dissolve in our cream first. So while I'm gonna do the butter, I'm gonna get this potassium carbonate. We're using probably about a teaspoonful, will be plenty for this recipe. Make sure I got it all. Stir that in there so it has a chance to dissolve. There we go. Now, our butter goes in next. This is gonna be just like how we did that crust in the apple pie recipe. Just put that butter in here, it's already chilled, and we're just gonna rub that in as best we can. Oh boy, that smells good with all that ginger in there. Now let's work on our wet ingredients. We've got 2 wet ingredients. We've got cream and we've got eggs. You know what? Unfortunately, this recipe, while it's great in every other respect with the quantities, in fact, really good because it gives us weight of flour instead of cups of flour. But here we don't know how much cream, so we're gonna use about a cup of cream. I've played around with this earlier. So a cup of cream, we're just gonna pour that in. It's already got our baking soda in there. And then we've got 2 eggs. I'm gonna add maybe just a little bit more than the recipe would call for, but 2 eggs, in they go. Now let's all mix it up in the bowl. This dough smells good, and don't tell anybody, even the dough tastes great. These guys are rolled out, they're ready to go into the oven, and kind of give them a little bit of space on the sheet because they'll probably grow just a touch. This is supposed to go into a slack oven, so 350, maybe even 325. You don't want it to be too hot, you don't want to burn them. 15 minutes is what she calls for, but I'm gonna watch them closely. They may not take that long. Ginger cakes, right out of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. This may have been the very last thing that Ichabod Crane actually put in his mouth. We get to try it out. Recipe right here from Amelia Simmons' cookbook. Let me tell you, these smell glorious. I mean, the smell was coming out of the oven. You knew they were done. They're cooked just the right amount. You do want to cook these in a slack oven so they don't get too hard. I think that putting in the double the amount of ginger helped them. Let's take a look. Look at that, breaks perfectly nice and leavened. Wow. They taste even better than they smell. They are just so wonderful and soft. And you know, this is completely different than those English ginger cakes, which would have been like ginger flavored leather. Very hard, tough texture. Crispy maybe, but not like a ginger snap, like snap your teeth kind of snap. These are so light and airy, wonderful flavor. They are amazing and so easy. So very good. And I love going back into these classic American works from the 18th century, or in this case, the early 19th century, and pulling a recipe right out of it so that we can almost be in it. I love that, and it's so much fun to dig back into that. If you're interested in another episode that is from the same feast, try this donuts recipe.